And what unfolded was so unexpected. On the one hand, it was this hero's journey about someone who, it's very odd talking about Amy when she's actually here, but who managed to accomplish something that the systems failed to do. But also it was about humanity, and it was about so much we see, or so often we see violence being confronted with violence, and in this story, or in reality, Amy managed to stop these horrific things through humanity and through compassion. And I thought that was an extraordinary story, and one really worth telling.
Amy, I have to apologize because Eddie has an excuse because he was on another continent when this was happening, and when the story was, I lived in New York and New Jersey, no idea that this story had happened, and you were a hero in the not all heroes wear capes, we hear that a lot, like they wear scrubs, and it was really amazing to see the story finally come to the forefront. Is it strange to see the story unfold the way it does on screen versus what happens in real life?
So many people said that they had never heard of this story, and one of the reasons is they always painted him as a mercy killer. Charles Cullen was not a mercy killer. And I think that the victims have been very sterilized into not being victims, because we believe that victims of serial killers need to be brutalized, and there has to be outward violence for us to think about them as victims. So I think for me, the most important thing about this film is to give the soul back to those victims. There were hundreds of them. Yes, it's bizarre to see it on film. I think one of the most bizarre things, though, is a true testament to Eddie's art, because knowing Eddie in person, and now we've known each other for a couple of years, he's not Charlie Cullen. He's not the murderer, he's not Charlie Cullen. Yeah, exactly. But the way, his kindness, and but also he can command a room just with his presence. And that was not Charlie Cullen. So to watch him become this person, I have only been able to watch this movie once, because it is my friend Charlie up there on the screen. It's not Eddie, and it's just amazing to watch. It's amazing.
Eddie, I'm not asthmatic, but when I say the gasp, I couldn't breathe in the scene in which she comes home and you're in the house, and you guys felt that, right? There was like, I can't talk. That has to do a lot with the direction of Tobias, and just the way you express things without even saying words. Like, just seeing your face in the scene is terrifying. Can you talk about not in a bad way, guys. Can you talk about just how the direction and the writing really helped you tap into those key moments?
Never has the word terrifying been so complimentary. The interesting thing about the making of this film, Tobias Lindholm, our director, is an exceptional man, and working with Christy Wilson-Cairns, anything in this script that leaned towards genre or moments that were there for thrill were filleted back to the extent that he has an extraordinary moral call. And if you haven't seen his Danish movies, they're extraordinary films. And he wanted to get rid of anything that pushed towards genre. An example of that is there was one scene originally in the script in which Amy is collecting the printouts of all the information, collecting the evidence. And it was a scene where I then arrived, and she, or Jessica playing Amy, had to sort of cover it up. And we were shooting one night, a night scene, and we were doing this scene, and we did one take of it. And Tobias walked up to Jessica and I, and he said, "Go home." And I could see the producer go, what? And even Jessica, like, why? Because no, this is the only moment so far that hasn't rung true because it's not true. This is us falling into this untruthful place, trying to play a shock when it undermines Amy's intelligence, and it didn't happen. So go home. Even Jessica and I were both like, maybe just shoot it. You might need it in the edit. You never know. Like, you know. But his authority over that was extraordinary, and it's a testament also to Christie's writing. So that scene, when I first met Amy via Zoom at the end of the pandemic, she talked at length about Charlie's kindness, about the fact that he saved her life, about this sort of self-deprecating humour, but that their friendship was very, very real, and she really underlined that to Jess and I. But that was when the whole thing shifted, because this was a film about a friendship in some ways. And actually that scene was so beautifully written that his intentions in that scene are totally true. It's the way it's filmed that, you know, that there's a level of narcissism in him. There's a moment when Amy goes, you know, you're such a, sorry, Jessica, as Amy goes, you're such a, you know, you've been so great to me and all these sorts of things. And he's sitting there going, yeah, I have, you know, like, you know, and which I thought was kind of interesting, because I believe that Charlie did have that narcissistic element that really exposed itself later when he reveals this other side of him. But the interesting thing about that scene, it was all in the writing and the shooting.
Amazing. Amy, I have to talk with you about having conversations with Jessica Chastain and telling her about yourself and giving her the tools needed to accurately capture yourself. And then with that, Eddie, did you reach out to Charlie at all? And was there any conversations or anything like that? So Amy, please.
Jessica and I did meet at first via Zoom. One of the most important things I wanted to be clear about is that the me from 20 years ago is not the me of now. And Jessica captures the me from 20 years ago, albeit a much gentler me. I definitely had more of a chip on my shoulder. I was much more reactionary than she is, although the way that she plays it, I think that she took the wisdom that I have now and added it to the character of who I was 20 years ago. But watching her play me allowed me to then forgive myself for not seeing the signs sooner. And I couldn't do that for myself. I needed that moment of watching her and disassociating myself. And I did show up. I did make sure that I was a good nurse. I was a good mom. And I could give myself that pride that I hadn't felt before. I really judged the me from 20 years ago. So yeah, it was really, Jessica Chastain, oh my God. Oh my God, I had to like fan myself. And she literally looks like a fairy princess in real life. Like the first time I met her in real life, I was like, oh my, like I thought she was gonna sprout wings at any moment. And she is that nice too. She really is that nice. Mm-hmm.
Any preparation?
There was never an option to meet Charlie. Charlie is in prison and will remain there till 2024, I think, or sorry, 23 something or other. It's many life sentences. But also, interestingly hearing you say that, Amy, the Charlie that you can see in this is 60 Minutes interview with him that's on YouTube, and he's a very different man now. And I mean, I looked at Amy about that, but but certainly the person you described to me and felt very, very different. And actually, this film is based on a book called The Good Nurse, the last third of which is Amy's story, and the other 2/3 are really quite an intricate biography of Charlie's life and the hospitals that he was at before. And that was an amazing resource because it was psychiatric reports, it was details about his family. It was kind of an actor's dream, really, to have that. And so that was the initial inroad. And then talking to Amy, it was because this film is from Amy's point of view, as well as looking at all the footage of Charlie from the time. Some of those scenes, like the interrogation scene, most of that text is verbatim, and even some of the scene, the diner scene, there are moments that Christy, our writer, has taken from the recording. So that's kind of how I approached it.
One thing that the film does so brilliantly, it's a horror movie, but not in the way that you expect it. It's not horror because a guy is killing people. It's a horror movie because I think it really puts a very scary, accurate depiction of the healthcare system and insurance and our right to healthcare that we don't have yet. And so when that story is underlined underneath your own story and this quest to tell the truth, how did you rectify that how did you get that across through Jessica's performance of telling that desperation of, I need my job, I need to work while I'm ill because I need health insurance? Did you guys talk about that?
I mean, that was the core of the script, but that was just Amy's reality, and that's there was nothing sort of added to that. I come from the UK. We're lucky enough to have the National Health Service, which has its own problems, but some of these things, when I read this script, I just couldn't believe. It was sort of impossible for me to wrap my head around. And what, systems, Jessica and I went to nurse school, but in preparation for this,
imagine being a nurse and then Eddie Redmayne walks in and goes, I need to watch you guys for a while.
The answer is I'm a fucking useless nurse. In the first take of the first scene, I managed to pin myself with never come to me in a crisis. But part of it was about, interestingly, our first day of nurse school, Jess and I was about the history of nursing and how it stemmed from wards, and it was sort of, the infrastructure of wards and everything stemming from it. Of course, these places come from good, their systems born out of good. But what happens is when the systems become so big, convoluted, or for profit, everyone becomes a cog. And the thing that I thought was extraordinary about the truth that is at the core of this story is that it took Amy, who was suffering from a heart condition, was a single mum looking after 2 young kids. I'm going to speak for Jess here, who said that one of the most important things that Amy said to her about in preparation was that when Jessica asked Amy why she was a night nurse, she said so that my children would think that I was a stay-at-home mum, so she could be around during the days, but where was the time that she was able to kind of look after herself? So it took someone under immense pressure to have faith, and in her, it took that individual to achieve and accomplish what a system was completely failing to do, because we lose our individuality if we don't question and interrogate. So I thought that theme is the film, really.
Amy, I think everyone kind of wants to know, and I know we see the title credit, yeah, you're still a good nurse, but what are you doing today? And do you get questions, or do people recognize you? What's your experience nowadays?
Well, I was in the airport today and the People magazine came out, and there I am in the spread of People magazine, so it felt kind of cool, but no, nobody really noticed. Nobody knows who I am. If I stand
before today.
Yeah, I actually was introduced once as the real Jessica during one of her. kind of, yeah. I retired about a year and a half ago, and Charles Graber, the brilliant investigative reporter who found me, I was only known as CI in all of the paperwork until he found me. And I am now working on a special project with him.
I'm desperate to know what that is.
Okay. You'll let us know about that, right?
You'll all know, I
Okay.
promise.
Eddie, the last big question is, we are in a room full of SCAD students. You can make some noise if you're a SCAD student. Nobody. We're in a room full of SCAD students, and they're looking over at you. Some because they're in love with you, but we heard it. And the other is because you're really effing talented, and you have built an amazing career. You also sing like an angel. I will always hold that. Like, I remember hearing him and Leave as a Rob. I was like, wait a minute, stop. Like, you're too talented. But what advice do you have for these dreamers, these artists of today that are looking to make the plunge to one day sit on this stage next to Clayton Davis, even Amy? Also, we're all sitting here and they want to sit here and talk about their latest film and their project and do what they always wanted to do. What's your piece of advice for them?
Well, firstly, as I said at the beginning, I had an amazing day today and got to meet many of the performing arts students, and I can't tell you how invigorating it was. It was like genuinely really inspiring to me, because one of the things is you don't feel like when you enter this world of acting, you don't feel like you ever have anything tangible, like any sort of talent or process or that's particularly, that's something that you can really hold on to. But hearing the questions that were asked today and really interrogating those, for me, was enlightening. The thing that I would say, which is kind of what I said at the Q&A earlier, is don't be safe. Don't choose the safe option. Push yourself to the extremes. Like, particularly at this stage, like for university, college for me was about playing parts that you'll never get cast as. Like parts that are so beyond because the second you're in the real world, you'll be cast to type and the way you look and the way you sound, and actually just, so suddenly what can happen then is when you're in the real world and auditioning for things, your parameters become small and you just sort of stick, and so the fear then of risking something becomes more extreme. So I would say keep dreaming, because God, it's an extraordinary thing to be a storyteller. You get to meet people like Amy and you get to tell stories that I think are as important as this one, but never play it safe.